February.
They get our faces
Did you have
from the other
printouts?
side.
Or we?
Yes, it should be on your left right there.
Oh, okay.
So,
Got it.
welcome to the March 9th meeting for the Land Use Committee. From what I see, I believe we actually have a quorum. We have 5 members.
Awesome.
So we can actually do motions and approve things, like minutes that date all the way back to December.
1952, don't they?
Yes. There are minutes that go back to December.
Yeah.
Those, the January minutes, the
Yeah.
February minutes all need motions for approval unless,
Okay. Yeah, because I had those.
Can we just approve them
And I
all at
did.
once?
you can
Yeah.
approve them all at once if you'd like.
Because I did go over them very, very carefully. And then we just
Can I
see
make a
if
motion to
anything-
approve December 9th, January 13th, and February 10th?
Second. All those in favor?
George, are you?
Abstaining because I missed at least one of those.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute, I missed December, apparently.
November,
Can we
December,
vote by
Oh, you said
one?
December.
January. You said
We can
three,
vote
but-
by each one, yes.
Because I missed one as well.
All right,
Okay.
I don't remember which one I missed.
sorry, guys.
Oh,
Um,
you weren't at the meeting.
Right.
Did I? Oh, I know, I did miss.
So what I have in the January minutes, it says that Freeman and Polly motioned to approve them, but Sarah, Barbara, and Sanford wanted to abstain because they were not at the December meeting.
Mhm.
I don't,
I still don't have a quorum, because I can't vote on December.
you can vote, it depends if Freeman, you can approve the February minutes because I believe the exception of,
Yeah, I can approve the January meeting, because I was at the January meeting.
Yeah,
And I wasn't at December either, so December we can't do.
And I wasn't here in November.
You can do it as an act of faith.
yeah, but I mean,
it's-
if you've
it's-
read them, shouldn't they be able to?
if you've read the minutes, you can vote on them.
Yeah.
And the recordings are online if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, because
Just-
I really went over them very carefully, and I didn't hate, didn't even
Freeman,
have
you
a
were saying?
I'll
comment.
vote for all of them.
All right, is there a second?
Second,
Right.
all
Vote?
in favor?
Okay. Motion to approve all minutes.
They're straight.
Okay, this is the,
Okay,
yeah.
now that those are all finally done, we can move on to Article 4. So last meeting, we went over Article 3, which was the site plan process. Bill tells me that when I wasn't here for a brief time in the meeting, probably when I was making some copies, he went over Article 1 and 2 with everyone. That's general and administration. Not sure if what did in fact happen, but in case he did, we can go over Article 4 right now. So that's going to go over non-conforming uses. The planning board went over this. I think, Sarah, it was approved last year, I believe,
I think so.
along with shoreline zoning. So for Article 4, it's going to just be reading through it
Yeah,
and more grammatical than anything. Since Article 4 was syncing up with the main DEP shoreland zoning. So are there any questions before I proceed?
You didn't give us.
so we're good on
Article
1 and
four.
2, is that what you said?
You had Article,
I already had
you
it.
always lose
Yeah.
your stuff.
Yes, I do, or I don't bring it.
So
So
we're-
proceed.
We're good on 1 and 2, is that?
Yep,
the deal?
1 and,
Okay.
yep, those 1 and 2 were good. Article 4, I'll just, like last time, I'll read it out loud and just
Okay.
tell me at the end of the paragraph if you want to add or change anything. So, Article 4, non-conforming uses. 4.1, purpose. It is the intent of this ordinance to promote land use conformities, except that the non-conforming conditions which existed before the effective date of this ordinance shall generally be allowed to continue, subject to the requirements set forth herein. Except as otherwise provided in this ordinance, a non-conforming condition shall not be permitted to become more non-conforming. In a situation of abutting non-conforming properties in common ownership, one or more may become more non-conforming provided the non-conformity of the additional lot or lots is lessened.
Well,
That last sentence means that if you want to change lot lines between two non-conforming lots, you can do it, I think.
Mhm.
I have a question about the timing. This says this ordinance that we're going to, but did we have non-conforming languages prior to now?
Correct. So it means like for this ordinance, for example, that last amendment was made last year. So, and that was only talking about shoreline. So an example would be you couldn't build anything 100 feet away from, let's say, Madomic River. But an older ordinance said you can't build anything 125 feet. If you built something 101 feet away before this new change was made, that's not conforming.
But
So-
my point would be, let's say someone had built 100 and 124, in other words, this language tends to suggest legally that if something was non-conforming under the old rules, it's given a safe harbor because the way it reads.
It's still considered non-conforming, yes.
No, this seems to me starts to set,
You can't
which
be-
exists before the effective date of this ordinance shall generally be allowed. In other words, I think you don't want to absolve any prior non-conforming use, even if we don't know about it, that applies to non-conforming the existing ordinance, to now become do you see what I'm saying? We have a lawyer here. Does the lawyer see what I'm saying?
Well, there would be two situations. One, you might have a use that was conforming up to the date of the adoption of this amendment.
Which is fine. That should be absolved.
And, but if you had let's take it three phases. You know, let's say something was built before there were any zoning ordinance.
Hmm.
And in the first zoning ordinance, that became a permitted non-conforming use.
Hmm.
Okay? That will continue to be a permitted non-conforming
Right, that's got a
use.
safe harbor.
Right.
Yes.
And then, you know, and that just cascades.
So, but it says more non-conforming, so if you were non-conforming at 100 feet, when the rule was 125, if the rule went to 120, you would be more non-conforming.
No, you're still, well, I mean,
So more.
The word more is what I'm wondering about.
Yeah.
So let me read the building permits, for example. So in the building permit, you can't build anything that's any closer than 75 feet from the road and 30 feet from a side or rear property line. So let's say you built something that was 25 feet from your neighbor's property line. If you want to keep building on that, you can. It just can't cross that 25-foot line.
Can't get any closer.
It can't get any closer than 25 feet.
That's what that means, right.
So if the zoning ordinance changed from a higher number,
If it became more strict, you're still under, that building you made was built under that less strict ordinance.
so he's grandfathered.
So he's grandfathered.
Which is fine. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying
So-
the way it reads is that it tends to say that if something was non-conforming under previous law, you now have grandfathered it by the way it reads, which existed before the effective date of this ordinance shall generally be allowed to it should only be for something, you see what I'm saying?
But it would still be grandfathered.
But it can't be grandfathered if it was in violation and we didn't know about it under the previous rules.
well, I think we.
I think what you're talking about is if there was a restriction and somebody built a structure that violated that restriction, then that's not I think what you need to distinguish, the phrase we're looking for is permitted non-conforming use.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
So is that what we're looking for? It isn't, except that the permitted non-conforming conditions?
Except that permitted non-conforming conditions, right. So that it was unpermitted, this is why we need a lawyer here.
Okay.
Perfect language.
So if you have a structure that was a permitted non-conforming use. And then the scope of the area is modified and increased. If you have a one-story house, are you permitted to put a second story on that house as long as it doesn't further encroach into the?
As long as it's no more non-conforming, yes.
It's no longer closer to whatever boundary it was governed by.
Right, it's not close to the boundary,
Right.
it doesn't go
Okay.
over 42 feet in height.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't exceed the height limit
Right.
applicable to the area. Yeah.
I'm still working a little bit on what the words more non-conforming means. If I actually have two adjacent parcels that I own on Dutch Neck, it's good, it could be important. If a building is too close to a line and it was put there before it was too close, before there was a limit.
Right, before there was a line.
Before there was a limit, a
Okay.
distance. And so a distance was established, and say I'm 20 feet, and the limit now is 25 feet, but it's always been there. If that limit went from 25
To
to
15.
15,
It's still a non-conforming building.
but that's a more non-conforming if there's even less margin.
But the building was made before the ordinance change, correct?
Right, I'm saying there's another ordinance change that makes it a lesser distance. Or what does the words more non-conforming mean? Give me an example of a more non-conforming.
If, hello,
Hi, I'm sorry I'm late.
it's all right. If you make it so that your building wouldn't meet these building standards, that's more non-conforming. Like not, trying to
I don't think it's our intent to have anybody have to take something down
No.
because we changed an ordinance.
no.
No, that's,
More non-conforming is like you say, you have your building that's 20 feet from the property line. If the ordinance changes so that you can't have something that's 15 from the property line, that's not taking away your house at all. It's still non-conforming. It's grandfathered.
But arguably, someone could say, well, it's more non-conforming because it's even closer.
But you didn't cause it, correct?
I didn't cause it, the change in
ordinance.
the law changed it.
Right. This is saying
Oh,
that
okay, you have,
This
the
is-
action of the,
the more non-conforming is on you.
Okay,
If
not-
you make it more
okay,
non-conforming.
all right, that's good. I wonder if there's
instead of using the word permitted,
Mhm.
non-conforming, because that implies that a permit was obtained at some point, whereas a lot of non-conforming uses were created before there were any building permits. So maybe the word established,
historical established. Yeah.
right?
The established.
Yeah, established non-conforming use. And maybe we ought to think about defining that, actually.
Okay. Define.
That's a good idea.
Define established.
Or define this established non-conforming use.
Okay.
Just to, since I'm here, it could be an allowed use because it started before the law made it disallowed. That's
Right.
the established use. But I think there's also exceptions to the rule you can get by appeal. So it's-
Yeah, and that's later.
That's,
We're only talking about the purpose so far of this whole article.
yeah. Okay, but you see what I mean, there are two ways you can
Right.
have your building too close to the line, because it was there first. or
And then
because
you
it-
get a variance. And
Or a
that's-
variance, yeah,
And that's,
different language.
yeah, that's
Okay.
completely different language.
So we'll have to know to look in two places if we're trying to keep our building up.
Right. So before we continue, did you have any comments? Just, I didn't know if there was a citizen comment or you just wanted to listen
No,
in.
I just wanna listen, that's all. No, I don't have, I'm just here.
All right,
Yeah,
just asking.
yeah, no, that's fine, thank you.
All right. So, was there any other comments for the first paragraph?
Sorry.
All right, moving on to 4.2, general provisions. 4.2.1, continuance. The lawful use of any building, structure, or land that is made non-conforming by reason of the enactment of this ordinance, or which shall be made non-conforming by reason of a subsequent amendment, may be continued, subject to the provisions of this ordinance. 4.2.2 Transfer of ownership. Non-conforming lots, structures, and uses may be transferred, and the new owner may continue the non-conforming use or continue to use the non-conforming structure or lot, subject to the provisions of this ordinance. 4.2.3 This ordinance allows, without a permit, the normal upkeep and maintenance of non-conforming uses and structures, including repairs or renovations that do not involve expansion of the non-conforming use or structure, and such other changes in a non-conforming use or structure as federal, state, or local building and safety codes may require. 4.3 Non-conforming structures. 4.3.1 A non-conforming structure is any structure that does not meet one or more of the dimensional requirements of this ordinance. Yeah.
Dimensional requirements would include setbacks and so forth?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to just change that to building requirements of this ordinance?
Yeah, I would say dimensional.
They're all gonna be about setback, aren't they? Couldn't you say setback?
Right.
Well, there's setback, there's also max lot coverage.
Is dimensional requirements defined anyplace?
I do not believe so.
Okay. So, if it's not.
Oh, actually, dimensional requirements is right here in Article 3, Schedule of Dimensional Requirements.
Then you should, it's a reference article.
Yeah.
Paragraph.
Well, it wouldn't be the new Article 3, it would be wherever we have the new matrix. So, but I can,
Or as defined.
Yeah.
as
Because
defined.
when I first looked at it, I thought that's only about the size and the setbacks. Isn't there a lot more to non-conforming? It's a lot more involved, isn't it, than just
Yeah, it's
the dimensions?
pretty much this matrix of shore frontage,
Yeah.
lot coverage,
Yeah,
building height.
I mean, for example, it seems to me that, if I understand this correctly, if you have a setback requirement from waterfront, for example,
Mhm.
and you have a dwelling that's non-conforming because it's the side that faces the water body is not the.
Is too close, yeah.
To put an addition on the back side of that building would not,
Would be fine,
that would be fine, because it wouldn't increase the nonconformity.
correct.
Yeah, okay.
So I'll include a reference to this section right here for that sentence.
Just as a brief aside, when it talks about the shorefront, does it say mean high water, or how does it define shore?
Shore frontage, when it's in this section, it's talking about how much of your property is, has a boundary with the water. Like road frontage is from point A to point B, it's 200 feet, but shore,
So the distance to the shore, is
that's a
that,
different item.
that's not
That's
in
shoreline
that-
zone, right,
That's not part of that table?
correct.
Yeah,
That will,
this is what I was talking about, okay, go ahead. Look at the next article here.
continuance, or
The expansion, that's what I was.
Expansion, okay.
That's what I was thinking about.
am I going through all the points, or should I just say like the boldened word of what the, I'll just do that, non-shoreland area?
Yeah.
A non-conforming structure may be repaired, maintained, improved, or replaced, but shall not be expanded, enlarged, or increased unless such expansion does not make the structure more non-conforming regarding the dimensional requirements of this ordinance, or unless a variance from such requirements is granted by the Board of Appeals according to their criteria established in Article 11, Appeals. That's going to be Article 5, not 11.
That's what I was just talking about.
So, next page. Floodplain area. New construction to or substantial improvement of any structure located within Zone A, and I don't know why this is all highlighted, I'm not sure why. So, any structure located within Zone A and A1-30 of Article 8, floodplain management, shall have the lowest floor, including the basement, elevated to 2 feet above the base flood elevation as certified by a registered main surveyor or registered professional engineer or architect.
Why is that in non-conforming use?
Because there could be because of the substantial improvement, I
Okay,
believe.
all right,
And
yeah.
also, new construction could include a new addition to it, so like a side porch or something.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So,
Just out of curiosity, what is the base flood elevation?
the base flood elevate, okay.
This isn't the 100-year storm or anything, this is something else?
No, Zone A usually is Zone A and A130 does refer to the flood elevation when there's a significant storm, pretty much. Base flood elevation, are you asking like how much that is, or?
What is it?
Is it the 100-year storm, or is it
That's something I'd
sea
have-
level, or?
100-year flood, yeah, not sea level. But I can pull up like FEMA maps to show you like places that are in the floodplain and base flood elevation.
I've never heard that phrase before.
So definition for that as well?
Just out of curiosity, because it means the basement has to be 2 feet above.
Right.
Is it, so I'm just trying to understand it.
I think that's the level you want to be at before the I'm trying to think of the right word for it.
That
like-
would suggest that all basements should have the opportunity to drain by gravity to somewhere.
So I will get that. Bill will probably also explain it when he gets here. To find that.
If you were able to dig a long enough trench.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Build at the top of the hill, not at the bottom of the hill, right?
So shoreland area expansions. All new principal and accessory structures, excluding functionally water-dependent uses, must meet the water body, tributary stream, or wetland setback requirements contained in articles set, again, this will be updated to what it actually is, the shoreline zoning article. A non-conforming structure may be added to or expanded after obtaining a permit from the same permitting authority as that for a new structure. If such addition or expansion does not increase the nonconformity of the structure and as in accordance with subparagraphs 4.4.2 and 4.4.3 below. Next one. Expansion of any portion of a structure within 25 feet of the normal high water line of a water body, tributary stream, or upland edge of a wetland is prohibited, even if the expansion will not increase nonconformity with the water body, tributary stream, or wetland setback requirement. Expansion of an accessory structure that is located closer to the normal high water line of a water body, tributary stream, or upland edge of a wetland than the principal structure is prohibited, even if the expansion will not increase nonconformity with the water body, tributary stream, or wetland setback requirement.
Does that say that it's, or is there gonna be some more language that comes up with a much greater distance to the shore? 25 feet is,
25 feet, I believe, is the closest it goes.
but I didn't think you could ever build 25 feet from the water. Maybe you can, I just,
This is saying that you can build 25 feet, well, depending on what district we're in.
in the shoreline zoning.
Right. If you have a non-conforming building that's 26 feet away, you can still build, well,
Oh, and this is a historical building, this isn't a new
Right.
building, okay.
Right.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking about.
and if you want to make a little shed or something that would accompany your principal building, but the principal building's maybe 200 feet away, you can't build that little shed within the 25 foot because,
It'd have to be 26 feet.
right.
Right.
So 4.4.3, notwithstanding subparagraph 2 above, if a legally existing non-conforming principal structure is entirely located less than 25 feet from the normal high water line of a water body, tributary stream, or upland edge of a wetland, that structure may be expanded as follows, as long as all other applicable municipal land use standards are met, and the expansion is not prohibited by 4.3.3.
So if somebody has a building on a dock,
Mhm.
what's the rules on buildings on docks, which are within, they're at the shore, they're, in fact, they're.
Docks are separate.
There's a whole separate thing for things with docks.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll come to that if I was trying to do that.
That will be in shoreline zoning.
Okay.
So next one, the maximum total footprint for the principal structure may not be expanded to a size greater than 800 square feet or 30% larger than the footprint that existed on January 1st, 1989, whichever is greater. The maximum height of the principal structure may not be made greater than 15 feet or the height of the existing structure, whichever is greater. Next,
Wait a minute, does that start 15 feet from where? From the ground?
maximum height of the principal structure may not be greater than 15 feet or the height of the existing. Yeah,
May not
15
be.
feet from the ground.
Just wondering. So if you've got a 4-foot foundation wall, and so that you can have your floor.
15 from the ground. If you're digging under, it doesn't count.
Well, but couldn't you fill back up against your foundation wall to?
Yeah, it's a backfill.
Just wondering if that's something we address in some place. Do you see what I think we both are stumbling into here?
So someone pretty much just digs the ground around them is what you're saying?
You have to put a foundation down if you're building this, you're repairing this building.
Right.
You put a foundation down and you want it to adhere to the other language about the floor of the foundation.
Okay.
So your foundation now sticks up above the ground a bit so that the bottom of it won't be too low.
From the ground from when you initially, wait, we're talking about a non-conforming building?
If it's a non-conforming building, you're saying it's already there,
The building that's already there, yes.
but you can replace one that burns down, I think.
Yes. May not be expanded to a size greater than 800.
So I have a building near the water that burns down, and I love that spot, so I'm gonna put another building there.
Okay.
It sounds like the floor of the lowest level of it, if it has a cellar, has to be above a certain level. It has to be 2 feet above.
You don't have to bring the cellar up, is that what you're asking?
I think the other language said you did.
If it's in a flood
Oh.
zone.
Okay, all right, well, I'll do the simpler one. So I build a frost wall that's 6 feet, and I look up there and there's 3.5 feet of it showing, but because it's 3.5 of the feet of the cement is showing, then the distance to the peak is now is unacceptable. The way I can get the distance to the peak to be acceptable is to raise the ground right there. And, I mean, people do.
So before you build, any new structure would still have to get a permit from Stan. So what you're saying is you built it,
I'm wondering how you.
failed to do it, and are expecting to. I don't understand the scenario you're really trying to give here.
And are you saying that if you build a building, the ground level has to come up to the edge of the ceiling of the basement? Is that what you were trying to say? No, I guess not.
I'm afraid I'm beating this to death, and it's not fair to the group with it.
I think we're gonna need
Bill
Bill
to
to
explain
really
that.
we need to go back loop on them.
Well, I
This
mean-
is very carefully crafted though, this whole section, because it says, in effect, if you're like a maritime thing and you're on a dock and you have these outbuildings and it's all within 25 feet of the water, it's actually gonna be on top of the water, you get certain rules, but then if you're a house and you're a little bit close on the land, then it's really basically restricting you to expanding. So it's very carefully crafted in terms of its envisioning of what the use is gonna be between commercial fisheries
And residential.
and residential, if you look at it.
So does that mean the other language would potentially incentivize building a house on a dock instead of building a house near the shore?
No.
What? No.
It's really more about an existing commercial fishery or like a marina, and them playing around with their stuff, and they have a lot of latitude, but then when you get to residences, it's very different.
Okay, so this is commercial versus residential.
Yeah,
These
this,
distinctions in here, yes.
right now, we're only talking about things 25 feet from the water. We're not even talking about the entire shoreland yet.
Right.
I mean, you know, it seems to me that the purpose of this is to preserve the visual features of the shoreline.
Mhm.
Yes.
You know, I mean, particularly the height limitation.
Mhm.
Yeah, doesn't it sort of state that nothing can be higher than 15 feet from the ground?
Or the
wherever
height
ground
of
may
the
be.
existing structure.
Yeah, I mean, you
So
can't, yeah.
if your existing structure was 8 feet off the ground, that's a tiny home you live in, but you're not going higher than 8 feet then. Or 15 feet, pretty much.
Okay, yeah, it's about the idea of moving where ground is, and maybe there's a historical way to know where ground is. And I should have had dessert and stayed home.
No, you should have brought the dessert here.
Yeah, gee.
So, I mean, Bill will be here and you can ask. There are other questions we'll get back to and he can explain, hopefully. if
And
Cushing ever shows up.
my intent here is to never put the planning board that I'm never gonna be on, if I have my way, in the spot of saying, yeah, but, look at this.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So 4.4.4, all other legally existing non-conforming principal and accessory structures that do not meet the water body, tributary stream, or wetland setback requirements may be expanded or altered as follows, as long as other applicable municipal land use standards are met. The expansion is not prohibited by 4.3.3 above. Next paragraph. For structures located less than 75 feet from the normal high water line of a water body, tributary stream, or upland edge of a wetland, the maximum combined total footprint for all structures may not be expanded to a size greater than 1,000 square feet or 30% larger than the footprint that existed on January 1st, 1989, whichever is greater. The maximum height of any structure may not be made greater than 20 feet or the height of the existing structure, whichever is greater. So this is the same thing that we
Same,
just,
yeah,
yeah.
Just slightly different standards.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then, same thing for the next point, only for 100 feet. And just an additional paragraph with it. Any portion of those structures located less than 75 feet from the normal high water line of a water body, tributary stream, or upland edge of a wetland must meet the footprint and height limits, section 4.4.3.1 and section 4.4.4.1 above. A lot of points. And next, in addition to the limitations in subparagraphs 4.1 and 4.2 above, for structures that are legally non-conforming due to their location within the Resource Protection District, when located at less than 250 feet from the normal high water line of a water body or the upland edge of a wetland, the maximum combined total footprint for all structures may not be expanded to a size greater than 1,500 square feet or 30% larger than the footprint that existed at the time the Resource Protection District was established on the lot, whichever is greater. The maximum height of any structure may not be made greater than 25 feet or the height of the existing structure, whichever is greater, except that any portion of those structures located less than 75 feet from the normal high water line of a wetland must meet the footprint and height limits in the previous sections 4.1 and 4.2 above. Next paragraph. An approved plan for expansion of a non-conforming structure must be recorded by the applicant with the Registry of Deeds within 90 days of approval. The recorded plan must show the existing and proposed footprint of the non-conforming structure, the existing and proposed structural height, the footprint of any other structures on the parcel, the shoreland zone boundary, and evidence of approval by the Municipal Review Authority. In this case, it would be the Board of Appeals. Next, for foundations. Whenever a new, enlarged, or replacement foundation is constructed under a non-conforming structure, The structure and new foundation must be placed such that the setback requirement is met to the greatest practical extent as determined by the planning board or its designee, basing its decision on the criteria specified in relocation, section 5 below. And then this was something that the planning board did when they initially looked at the non-conforming uses. It's just a chart that shows distance from the water, maximum structure allowed, and the height allowed. So next is relocation. A non-conforming structure may be relocated within the boundaries of the parcel on which the structure is located, provided that the site of relocation conforms to all setback requirements to the greatest practical extent as determined by the planning board, and provided that the applicant demonstrates that the present subsurface sewage disposal system meets the requirements of state law and the state of Maine subsurface wastewater disposal rules, or that a new system can be installed in compliance with the law and said rules. In no case shall a structure be relocated in a manner that causes the structure to be more nonconforming. In determining whether the building relocation meets the setback to the greatest practical extent, the planning board shall consider the size of the lot, the slope of the land, the potential for soil erosion, the location of other structures on the property and on adjacent properties, the location of the setback system and other the location of the setback of the septic system and other on-site soils suitable for septic systems.
Talk about alliteration.
Yep. And the type and amount of vegetation to be removed to accomplish the relocation. When it is necessary to remove vegetation within the water or wetland setback area in order to relocate a structure, the planning board shall require replanting of native vegetation to compensate for the destroyed vegetation. In addition, the area from which the relocated structure was removed must be replanted with vegetation. Replanting shall be required as follows. I don't know why there's that, but okay. Trees removed in order to relocate a structure must be replanted with at least one native tree 3 feet in height for every tree removed. If more than 5 trees are planted, no one species of trees shall make up more than 50% of the number of trees planted. Replacement trees must be planted no further from the water or wetland than the trees that were removed. Other woody and herbaceous... Oh. I thought someone was saying something. Other woody and herbaceous vegetation and ground cover that are removed or destroyed in order to relocate a structure must be reestablished. An area at least the same size as the area where vegetation and/or ground cover was disturbed, damaged, or removed must be reestablished within the setback area. The replacement vegetation and/or ground cover must consist of native vegetation and/or ground cover similar to that was disturbed, destroyed, or removed. Lastly, where feasible, when a structure is relocated on a parcel, the original location of the structure shall be replanted with vegetation which may consist of grasses, shrubs, trees, or a combination thereof. Let me just quickly see something. Okay. So, reconstruction or replacement. Any non-conforming structure which is located less than the required setback from the normal high water line of a water body, tributary stream, or upland edge of a wetland, and which is removed or damaged or destroyed, regardless of the cause, by more than 50% of the market value of the structure before such damage, destruction, or removal may be reconstructed or replaced provided that a permit is obtained within 12 months of the date of said damage, destruction, or removal, and provided in shoreland areas that such reconstruction or replacement is in compliance with the water setback requirements to the greatest practical extent as determined by the planning board in accordance with the purposes of this ordinance. In no case shall a structure be reconstructed or replaced so as to increase its nonconformity.
The 12-month requirement there,
Yes.
what if the planning board proceedings are strung out?
That a permit is obtained within 12 months.
It's a good question.
In accordance with the purposes of this ordinance, no case shall a structure.
or as allowed by the planning board.
That he-
There needs to be a distinction between the filing for the permit and
Yeah,
and as you're pointing
right.
out, when it's approved.
So maybe reconstructed or replaced provided that a permit is submitted within 12 months?
Application,
Well, yeah, permit, so application is submitted within 12 months of the date of said damage? Is that?
Yeah, I think that would do it.
Yeah, because they're not submitting a permit, right? They're submitting an application for a permit, right?
I mean, what if there's a, I mean, I'm thinking extended negotiation about these remediation requirements.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question about the water setback. Let's say someone has a boathouse, it's right on the water,
Mhm.
non-conforming, never be allowed now. Storm destroys it, they apply, but clearly they're not in compliance with wetback, would they be allowed to rebuild a boathouse?
Provided in shoreline areas, that's such.
Sense of what I'm seeing here is that they would be, yeah.
But it says, in shoreline areas, that such reconstruction or replacement is in compliance with the water setback requirements to the greatest practical extent.
Compliance would
That's
be
a lot.
practical.
I mean, that's pretty ambiguous.
That such is in compliance with the water setback. That's the term. I think it would be,
And it says as determined by the planning board, not by, I mean, it doesn't give
Right.
a rule. If I was a person, it wouldn't necessarily say, boy, I'm gonna get the result to replicate the boathouse that was destroyed.
so are you asking for it to reference the shoreland, the 4.4 where it's about shoreland? No, that wouldn't.
I think you need Bill for this, because again, I don't
Yeah.
know what state law is either. I'm not sure.
Maybe, so what you're saying is that it would be in compliance with whatever the water setback requirement is now,
And that would be that I couldn't rebuild my boathouse.
right?
I don't have one done.
Possibly.
Possibly.
I mean, you might have to build it smaller or whatever.
Well, it does say at the very end of that paragraph, in no case shall a structure be reconstructed or replaced so as to
As non-conforming.
as to increase its nonconformity.
Right,
But this would not be increasing, it would just,
Yeah.
it would just be replicating what it was non-conforming.
yeah, increases, not
Accordance-
the right word.
I'm just not sure, well, that language is fine, I'm just not sure that this would assure this person of getting their boathouse back.
Well, I mean, you know, your boathouse example, you know, clearly, in order for it to function, it has to be right on the water.
But-
Well, I
but-
mean,
but it says that-
maybe I'm not visualizing what a
It says
boathouse is.
determined by the planning board, it sort of suggests that they may not get it.
Yeah,
Is a boathouse a structure that sits over the water, or is it a structure that's back from the water and there's a ramp leading up to it?
Yeah, that is what
it
I'm
could be
picturing.
either, couldn't it?
Could be either.
Couldn't it be either?
Well, if it's over the dock, you said it's got some more rules. If it's on top of a dock.
So, the first example, where the boathouse is actually on, you know, on pilings driven into the waterbed, you know, its function, you know, couldn't be restored without building it exactly where it is.
Oh, I agree with that, but I'm just saying this
You know,
language.
So
says-
that's where the verb practical comes in. Whereas your boathouse that has a ramp, you know, that could be built further away, you know, with a longer ramp, I suppose.
Yeah, it does seem, it's gonna get kind of tricky when we have different sets of rules if you're on a dock over the water.
Yeah.
At high tide, it's not gonna be over water at low tide. I mean, there's, and if you have a ramp coming up to it, then it's a boathouse next to the water on, I'm afraid you don't want me here now. This, when you start getting into different rules, when it's on top of a dock, I wouldn't wanna be on the planning board.
You know, the boat spells out an acronym, bring over another 1,000.
The next paragraph might bring more clarity to this, so maybe that does it.
Read on.
There
Oh,
you go.
yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, If the reconstructed or replacement structure is less than the required setback, it shall not be any larger than the original structure, except as allowed pursuant to section 4.4.5 above, as determined by the non-conforming footprint of the reconstructed or replaced structure as its proposed new location. The total footprint of the original structure can be relocated or reconstructed outside the required setback area. No portion of the relocated or reconstructed structure shall be replaced or constructed at less than the setback requirement for a new structure. When it is necessary to remove vegetation in order to replace or reconstruct a structure, vegetation shall be replanted in accordance with section 4.4.5 above.
The next paragraph takes care of my
Yeah,
question.
the next, yeah, it does.
Okay, there's the answer.
In shoreland areas, any non-conforming structure which is located less than the required setback from a water body, just for the future, can I just say water body, because it's going to say that every single time, and which is removed or damaged or destroyed by 50% or less of the market value of the structure, excluding normal maintenance and repair, may be reconstructed in place if a permit is obtained from the code enforcement officer within 1 year of such damage, destruction, or removal. I think what was supposed to happen was that last, not that paragraph, but the one before it, I think was supposed to be combined with the other one, and then it would have gone into the shoreland distinction.
The 1 year limit, I think you still need to have, like we did before, I think you need to have that 1 year from submitting the application.
Maybe the thing I'm now thinking back on it and worried is someone will wait until the last day, submit an application to say, I'm gonna do this, then they're gonna wait a year and do nothing. It's pretty much gonna be the person just holding on to that footprint forever, pretty
Well,
much.
it would be for 2 years is how long they could hold on to the
Well,
footprint.
then, so, for both of these,
Mhm.
it might make sense to require that an application for a permit be submitted within 3 months or 6 months. And,
To avoid dragging it out.
and then, that any reconstruction has to be completed within, 6 months or a year or whatever from the date the application is granted.
Are we solving a non-problem? I mean, if someone waits a whole year and then doesn't do anything, it just means nothing happened. And nothing happening is kind of,
Well, then, it depends if we're talking about a completely removed structure or something that has only lost 50% of its market value.
no, you, I think, posed the concern that somebody could drag this out arguably for the purpose of dragging it out, or because they haven't got their money figured out, or, I'm not sure what the danger is of someone not completing this in time. To us. to
I
the
mean, some cases could just be the person's just leaving a hazardous
town.
structure
Well, that's
up.
okay, yeah, no, that's a valid,
I mean, depending on where it is located, it might be at the forefront of someone's property, and so if someone's trying to sell nearby, someone's looking at that when they're trying to sell it to someone. Or,
yeah.
Don't you think that they would want to get a permit right away to fix, within a reasonable amount of time, like 3 months or something, to get it done? Because it's still gonna take a while for that permit to be approved. So, like you said, it could go on for like 2 years. I don't understand why anyone would wait a year.
Has anybody here tried to hire a contractor to work on their house in the last couple of years?
Yes, I
Yeah.
know what you mean.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Yeah, but you can still apply for the permit, correct?
Well, but
yeah,
you know-
But what you have here is, a completion deadline.
Yeah, but once you get the permit, that's, what my point being, I think after the permit is done, then you grant them a year.
Yeah.
But they should
Right,
be
I
applying
agree.
for the permit right away, because now you've got a year, if you're giving them a year and they wait, then there's another year
Well,
before they might get
I
the
mean,
thing
so,
done.
I mean, again, the application may be a 3 month from the date of loss, so they should be able to figure out whether they've got insurance or whatever.
Right,
but,
yeah. Yeah. I think that a year is too long.
If they wanted to build a smaller building, which would be allowed, but hadn't designed it yet, keeping in mind the building permit needs to know the design of the building, because you buy it by the square foot.
You can always amend your application.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
It may be that in 3 months, someone hasn't figured out what they want to do.
right, but then I would think they would go and talk to the board, and the board could say, okay,
These are your
go
choices.
ahead, but we need this plan and this commitment, et cetera.
Yeah, the idea that you can amend a building permit is the answer,
Yeah,
the answer to
Right.
my question, really.
yeah,
But the process could easily take 3 years if you
Yeah.
did the engineering. It could take, from the time something is destroyed, it could take 3 years to get this done,
yeah,
easily.
yeah. All the more reason to get a permit so that
Right.
it doesn't look like you're abandoning the thing.
Not
And,
destroying.
you know, and it gets destroyed even more because it's compromised.
But you do need to allow for all those steps where you say
Right.
finally has to be built, because
Yep,
it takes structural engineers, it might take Prague Marine, I mean, it could be very complicated.
yeah,
I think there may be other, to do with dangerous or dangerous things, unstable things.
yeah,
Logs falling off, floating around the bay. I think there's other rules that would apply to that. Or dangerous half-broken buildings. I guess we don't really, we have rules, but they're tough to
because if
enforce.
it's compromised, a bad storm can compromise it further.
Yeah. No, yeah, and you could have pilings floating around the bay, too.
Yep,
Okay, complicated, but.
yeah,
Well, and also, I don't know if we want to keep it distinct of, you know, this paragraph is talking about the shoreline, and we talked about just any structural damage a few paragraphs ago. So I don't know if there's that other distinction we want to have. But this is something we'll come back to, since this seems like it's going to be quite a bit more discussion involved.
The planning board can grant extensions to the window, to the build window.
Yeah.
I believe all it wants to.
Yep.
That would cover the 3 years.
As long as there's indication that they've been making such
Something, yeah.
improvements, yeah.
yeah,
So then the last paragraph of that whole thing. In shoreland areas, in determining whether the building reconstruction or replacement meets the water setback to the greatest practical extent, the planning board shall consider, in addition to the criteria above, the physical condition and type of foundation present, if any. So then the next area, change of use of a non-conforming structure. This is only for the shoreland areas. The use of a non-conforming structure may not be changed to another use unless the planning board, after receiving a written application, determines that the new use will have no greater adverse impact on the water body or wetland or on the subject or adjacent properties and resources than the existing use. In determining that no greater adverse impact will occur, the planning board shall require written documentation from the applicant regarding the probable effects on public health and safety, erosion and sedimentation, water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, vegetative cover, visual and actual points of public access to waters, natural beauty, floodplain management, archaeological and historic resources, commercial fishing and maritime activities, and other functionally water-dependent uses.
So if you had a boathouse and you wanted to turn it into an apartment, you might be able to, but you'd have to answer a lot of questions. I mean, yeah,
Yes,
that's
pretty
what
much.
that intends to, yeah.
For example, Benny, where the former Benny's is, that is in a shoreland zone. So whenever that's gonna have to do something, that's gonna come to the planning board regardless, and this is something that will have to be included. So 4.4, non-conforming single-wide manufactured homes, that's just going to be referenced when we get to specific standards. So that's gonna be in a future article.
Article 5.
Yeah. Well, not this Article 5. Article 5 is going to be the appeals. I think this is going to be more Article 8, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we've already gone through it and passed it, or we're about to, but I think we talk about average high water or something,
Normal high water line?
normal high water line. I think there's a legal thing referred to as mean high water. Should we use what other people use?
That would be, that will come into the shoreland zone.
Well, except we've already been using one.
Yeah.
Should we be consistent? And I'm,
Wait, are you saying replace the language that was in this with what you're talking about, or?
Well, mean high water and. what you-
Normal high water.
Normal high water should be the same place.
Yeah.
But to the extent that it could be someone debating another foot or two, it seems like we should have one line. that
We were using normal high water line because that's what we got from the state.
So the state,
Chapter 1000.
okay, so then where does mean high water come in? So mean high water doesn't come in anywhere? Oh,
Not
I
that
thought
I-
you said, I thought you meant that they came in later. In the shoreline zoning parts.
I said later because I thought you were suggesting changing the language to mean high water lines instead of normal high water lines.
I was, because I just wanted to have them to be consistent so that there's no debate about what
Yeah,
they mean.
throughout this, it should just be normal high water lines.
So then the only reason I would flog this any longer would be if the state was using mean high water.
If the state changed it to mean high water line
Then we would
tomorrow,
change it, yeah.
then we would likely want to change it.
Okay.
So, okay.
What's the difference?
Well, I mean, mean has a specific,
That's a Department of Marine Resources
I
sort of
mean,
language.
you say mean high water, that means the average of high waters.
Throughout a
Normal,
period of time?
Well,
I'm not sure what normal means, you know.
Yeah.
the mean high water and mean low water, I'm sensitive to the words because they're the intertidal zone, which is where I either can or can't harvest seaweed.
Yeah.
And it's a place, and it has and many deeds stop at the shore, or some stop at mean high water, and some stop at mean low water, but
That's the distance thing.
the distance, that's
From
how many acres you've got.
Right,
Yeah.
and at high water you have less, low
Well,
water you have more, you know, your property is extending out.
Well, yeah, no, yes, but what I'm gonna try and stop being concerned about is that exact place called mean high, which we usually call mean high water when we're talking about it from the legal standpoint, and leave it at average high tide, which may move as the sea level rises, but that's
Yeah.
another thing.
So, Sanford,
Yeah,
if you want to see the definition of a normal high water line, it's in 16-20 of our current land use ordinance. It's pretty much where you would see that visible marking that separates how high the water goes.
Where the grass washes up.
You're suggesting that it's gonna be higher than mean high water.
See, 16-20? No,
20, yeah. Should be the second from the top.
oh, no, 16-18.
Oh, sorry.
You want to read it out loud?
Normal high water line.
Yes.
That line which is apparent from visible marking, changes in the character of soils due to prolonged action of the water or changes in vegetation, and which distinguishes between predominantly aquatic and predominantly terrestrial land, areas contiguous with rivers and great ponds that support the non-forested wetland vegetation and hydric soils and that are at the same or lower elevation than the water level of the river or great pond during the period of normal high water are considered part of the river or
Great pond.
Great pond. So that's different than mean
Yeah.
high tide,
Well,
basically.
yeah, well, actually,
Yeah.
one's tidal and one's lake.
Right.
Lakes have
Yeah,
average high water, which is, there's a low part of the year.
Right.
but
Yeah.
the definition of normal high water, I think that doesn't take into account tide. I think it's,
That line that you can see.
where the highest, the highest.
Yeah, where the grass is washed out.
Yeah, where
Yeah.
the vegetation and whatever.
Changes, yeah. No, I'm okay,
Yeah, we can leave it the way it is.
yeah,
All right.
I'm okay.
So now we're on 4.5 non-conforming uses. So this is uses. We've only been talking about buildings so far. So a non-conforming use is any use of land, buildings, or structures lawfully existing at the effective date of adoption or amendment of this ordinance, which does not conform to the requirements of the district or districts in which it is located. Continuance. The lawful use of any buildings, structure, or land which is made nonconforming by reason of the enactment of this ordinance or subsequent amendment to this ordinance may be continued, although such use does not conform to the provisions of this ordinance. Discontinuance. A nonconforming use of a building, structure, or land shall be considered discontinued if, in the case of a building or structure, it remains vacant for a period of 12 months, and in the case of an activity, if it ceases for a period of 12 months. During the following 12-month period, the building or structure may be reoccupied and the use reestablished with approval by the planning board pursuant to site plan review. Subsequent use shall conform to the regulations specified in this ordinance for the district or districts in which the building, structure, or land is located. If a nonconforming use is superseded by permitted use, the nonconforming use shall not thereafter be resumed.
Can you give me an example of a use
Of a nonconforming use?
or a use? We're talking about in the water now?
Nope, we're just talking about a building that's in a nonconforming area, so.
Okay, this isn't to do with,
This is just anywhere, so.
okay.
Let's say a sawmill where the sprout block is, or I guess store lumber would actually be the example.
Yes.
So that example is a non-conforming use. So if they were to shut down for 2 years, they can't come back and be a lumber mill again.
I mean, if they shut down for just 1 year, they have to get a permit.
Yeah, they would come back to the planning board and say,
Right.
we closed, we want to open again, and that's it, pretty much.
So, yeah, it's the use of, in this case, a building,
Yeah,
as opposed to just use of the land.
yeah,
Okay.
pretty much. And then there's last bit for discontinuance. Resumption of a residential use that has been discontinued for over 1 year will be allowed, provided that the structure has been used or maintained for residential purposes at any time during the preceding 5 years. Change of use. An existing non-conforming use of a building, structure, or land may be changed to another non-conforming use only when the new use has no greater impact on the subject and adjacent properties and resources, including water-dependent uses in the commercial fisheries maritime activities district, than the former use, as determined by the planning board. In determining that no greater adverse impacts will occur, the planning board shall require written documentation from the applicant regarding the probable effects on public health and safety, erosion and sedimentation, water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, vegetative cover, visual and actual points of public access to waters, natural beauty, floodplain management, archaeological and historical resources, commercial fishing and maritime activities, and other functionally water-dependent uses.
So you can have a non-conforming use.
Change to another
With the
non-conforming
planning board
use.
approval, you can change it to another non-conforming use.
Yep,
But if you had a conforming use.
you
Okay.
can't change it to a non-conforming.
I just find that a little, I'm not sure what, but,
I think the intent was,
well, I mean, you know, I mean, just the change of the, if you have a retail use that's
Right.
non-conforming, you know, changing the merchandise that's sold wouldn't be a change, I don't think.
as long as it's not merchandise that's specifically outlined here, like an adult entertainment business, for example.
Right.
That's a separate retail business.
Right, but I mean, if you're selling clothing and you decide to sell canned goods.
Then yeah, it's
that
still
wouldn't
retail.
be- That would, I mean, that's just a continuing retail
Yep.
use. Okay, so I made with the objective behind that is to allow, to avoid an economic loss if one particular line of business proves impractical and can be converted to another line of business, I suppose.
Mhm.
You know, so there's not an economic hardship on the owner, whereas converting from a residential use to a commercial use, residential being a permitted use and commercial being not permitted, that would result in a change in the character of the neighborhood, I suppose, so.
Well, they specified, as long as this has no
Yeah,
greater
no,
impact
but
on
I
the,
just-
Right.
I'm just-
you know.
I always look, I was looking behind, what's behind these things.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I apologize in advance. Because there may be a change in the law about the commercial harvesting of seaweed, sorry to do this, but I can't help myself. What has historically been a public resource, which would not have been allowed or disallowed in the town ordinance,
Right.
if someone decided they wanted to sell the seaweed off of what they believe is their intertidal zone, that's a commercial operation on private property that would have to be permitted?
So you're asking if seaweed harvesting is now going to be a permitted use?
Permitted commercial use that private people would engage in?
I mean, if it was already being harvested, it's not changing the use.
Well, it's going from public access use to
Private.
private enterprise. If you take some of these rulings at their face
Value.
value.
It's still not really changing. I mean, yes, it's going from public to private, but
It's now the landowner who arguably would need to have the
the permit.
permit as opposed to the licenses we've always bought. And I won't kill the meeting on this, but
I
I want
think
to
it's-
lodge the question.
I think it's whether we decide to, depends how far we want to go into this ordinance and what we want to create as a use, because, I mean, timber harvesting, for example, is certainly a different one from someone who just wants to do a little clear cutting in their backyard.
So
Same.
the zoning ordinances do make a difference on commercial lumber cutting as opposed to, I cut a tree down?
No, I mean, if you just want to cut some trees in general, you're fine, but if you're going to do timber harvesting, that is a different section.
And that's a permitted activity?
That's a permitted activity.
Okay, I will
I
stop
the,
asking right
the
now.
whole seaweed harvesting, I guess it's
Well, we should drop it, it's okay.
we can talk more about that in the shoreland zone, because that's probably where you want to talk more about this.
And I think Bill might be more knowledgeable than we would be.
Yeah.
On the interseas of federal, state, and local law.
Yeah. I think that's just something we'll have to
Yeah,
talk
I-
more in shoreland zone.
Couldn't help myself.
Expansion of a non-conforming non-residential use. The planning board may issue approval for an expansion of a non-conforming non-residential use up to a maximum of 15% of the original floor area of the existing structure, or in the case of an outdoor use, 15% of the original land area used for the activity, according to the criteria for site plan review contained in Article 3 of this
Sorry.
ordinance. It's actually Article 3, it's,
Oh, okay, so we can.
yep, of this ordinance, provided that the expansion meets the dimensional requirements and other provisions of this ordinance. The expansion of a non-conforming use shall not be for the purpose of changing that use to another non-conforming use, except as provided in paragraph 4.5.4 above. Expansions of non-conforming residential uses. Any non-conforming residential use of a building any non-conforming residential use of a building outside of the shoreland zone may be expanded upon approval from the planning board under the criteria for site plan review contained in Article, again, that's Article 3. Site plan and that's just site plan review, not subdivision of this ordinance, provided that said expansion is in compliance with the dimensional requirements and other provisions of this ordinance. Shoreland zone. Expansions of non-conforming uses within the shoreland zone are prohibited except that non-conforming residential uses may, after obtaining approval from the planning board, be expanded within existing residential structures or within expansions of such structures as allowed in section 4.3 above and as approved by the planning board.
What,
Yeah, I see two hands now.
how do you expand a residential use within an existing regis? You could mean, would be subdividing it into multiple units, for example.
Are prohibited except that
Having your kids come and live with you.
I mean, just, a side question.
I lowered the bar on side questions.
Yeah, I think this was more apartment focused, I think.
I mean, that might involve conversion of a single-family dwelling into multiple units without any expansion. So just putting in, additional entryways and interior walls, I suppose, something like that.
Freeman?
Normal high tide starts with the English, and it's now part of federal law as a definition.
Mhm.
It's more aggressive than mean high tide, meant to be both when the English started it, so it would be higher than an average of mean high tide, and also with streams, et cetera, it's a more aggressive definition. But it comes from federal law.
Okay. Where do the, wait, you're saying the mean one comes from federal law?
No.
The normal high water.
Tide, normal.
So where were you getting the mean high tide from?
Just people in Augusta. Department of Marine Resources, that's just the language you normally hear.
Well, I mean, in addition to that, we hear about, flood, high tide, neap, high tide,
Yeah,
neap
yeah.
being low,
Right.
flood being high, mean would be someplace in between. I think normal high water would be more on the order of flood tide for ocean water.
If it pushes up that stuff that's
I
on the
mean,
coast.
so that's a
would
more
be-
restrictive standard than.
Yeah,
than-
that's
than
closer to the
mean.
road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna make a note for that paragraph we just went over. Non-conforming lots of record. A non-conforming lot of record as of the effective date of this ordinance or amendment thereto may be built upon without the need for variance, provided that such lot is in separate ownership and not continuous with any other lot in the same ownership, and that all provisions of this ordinance except lot area. Wait, and that all provisions of this ordinance except lot area.
What's that last clause?
The one I just read, or are you talking about the next sentence?
No. Yes.
Except, provided that such lot is in separate ownership.
That last clause is just sort of hanging out there. I'm not sure.
I'm wondering if Bill put in a period there, and that all provisions of this ordinance except lot area variances relating to. Yeah,
Yes.
it is supposed to just be
I-
combined.
Yeah.
Looking at it, I think that's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
So it'd be lot area, comma,
variances. okay.
lowercase v.
And that all provisions of this ordinance except lot area variances relating to setback or other requirements not involving lot area, lot width, there's supposed to be a
Another
comma, lot width or shore frontage shall be obtained by action of the Board of Appeals. Continuous build lots. If two or more continuous lots of parcels are in single or joint ownership of record at the time of adoption of this ordinance, all or part of the lots do not meet the dimensional requirements of this ordinance, and if a principal use or structure exists on each lot, the non-conforming lots may be conveyed separately or together, provided that the state minimum lot size law and state of Maine subsurface wastewater disposal rules are complied with. If two or more principal uses or structures existed on a single lot of record on the effective date of this ordinance, each may be sold on a separate lot, provided that the above referenced law and rules are complied with. When such lots are divided, each lot thus created must be as conforming as possible to the dimensional requirements of this ordinance. Continuous lots, vacant or partially built. I think that whole part's supposed to be bold. Continuous lots, vacant or partially built. If two or more contiguous lots or parcels are in single or joint ownership of record at the time of or since adoption of are in a single or joint ownership of record at the time of or since adoption or amendment of this ordinance, and if any of these lots do not individually meet the dimensional requirements of this ordinance or subsequent amendments, and if one or more of the lots are vacant or contain no principal structure, the lots shall be combined to the extent necessary to meet dimensional requirements. And that's Article 4.
That last paragraph. I won't do it now.
There's a lot of real estate law involved with this part, including eminent domain. It's amazing how many statutes, decisions, common law things are involved that we just read.
Well, what that last thing means is if you've got two lots, defined lots, which aren't, and there's nothing on them, then you have to combine them into one lot. Where if you've got three lots, none of which are compliance, you might have to make two lots out of it to bring them into compliance.
Since you did that, I bought my neighbor's property. My frontage is compliant. His frontage is sub-compliant. And if I had put the new parcel in the same ownership as my parcel.
Right.
By putting my wife's name on the deed, then this would be a non-compliant lot, which I could never sell.
That's right, yeah.
So by keeping it in my own name, I was told I could sell it like it
As
is.
is, yes.
In Massachusetts, under that circumstance, you basically got, those lots don't merge until 5 years have passed, but,
Okay, well, yeah, well. But, so I'm this is important to me, so I can sell that
As is.
non-compliant lot as is.
Yep.
And that's what these words say.
Yep.
Good, I'll be quiet.
This also came up with farmers would give land to their family
Oh,
members.
yeah.
And then some of them would be stranded without egress, that would be it's a wild march through real estate history.
And we're just gonna put it all into one paragraph there.
Sure, why not?
So,
Get back to the colonial ordinance any minute now.
so, Article 5 is the last one we haven't gone through, but this should be a copy-paste of what we have in our ordinance right now. Don't know if this is something, I'm not sure if this is something we want to try and go through with the clock saying 7:25.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Because Bill's an expert on this, I would rather him take us through it and just say, he knows what we should look at and what we shouldn't. Somebody just says, well, if that's going to say we might want to look at this, it would make it faster
Okay.
and navigate it.
All right, that sounds good. So we can end earlier tonight then, if we would like.
That would be lovely.
So for next month, you should have Articles 7 and 9 also with you now. General performance standards and roads and driveways and parking, I believe. Or
Oh, yeah. we
roads,
do.
parking, driveways, and traffic access. So please read 5, 7, and 9 before next meeting.
Long as I'll try.
And
The
No,
April
excuse
13th?
us.
April 13th, the Monday after Easter,
April 13th.
April 13th.
That's my mother's birthday.
Are we, now, from what I had at the last meeting, were we talking about changing the meeting time again? Are we,
I think, Polly, you were thinking about that.
We're doing 6 now, right?
yeah, because I remember we changed it to 5:30 because
But we-
daylight savings was
yeah,
ending, but now
we-
that.
Right. Didn't we do 6 last time? Or am
We
I-
did 5:30 last time.
Okay. No, but I came at 6 tonight.
I give it 6:15.
So,
Yes,
so
you did discuss at the last meeting and said,
6 o'clock is.
because I forgot that it was going to be
All right.
the clocks jumping, et cetera.
So we're fine with
Yes.
having the meeting back at 6?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think.
Move we adjourn.
Second,
I-
Third.
I'm glad,
Our lawyer.
I'm glad that you and your wife made it to Florence before Italy was closed out.
We did